And now for dramatic readings of John Kay stuff and its commentary sections. In this episode, we take on Depressing 80s Cartoon Studios 2, Hanna-Barbera, The Style of Fear! And we encounter a certain individual known as Guy. Well, obviously I love the early Hanna-Barbera style. Even if you hate these cartoons, you have to admit this style is at least instantly recognizable. And this part I all agree about. Up until here. He started imitating Filmation. So, he says after the Arkies and Scooby-Doo, but in reality it means that it went out the window with Scooby-Doo, which I disagree with. I disagree that it went out the window with Scooby-Doo, but it quickly did sometime after. There were still a few shows that were passable. There was still Hong Kong Phooey, which was passable, but after that they wouldn't make anything that was remotely actually good until SWAT Cats in 1993. And then after that they stopped making good programming until Cartoon Network absorbed them and started making the cartoons. And then I guess Two Stupid Dogs was also okay, and the Super Friends were so bizarrely bad. They were fascinating, and for the time they were great, but they have aged terribly. And I heard that Pirates of Darkwater has a strong fandom. Oh, and I forgot Captain Caveman. That one was okay too. Although the character designs other than Captain Caveman had a lot to be desired. That is to say, in the case of the Fonz, the overall show is bad, but the Girl for the Future was a quite cute design. And he says, this is a style that has evolved out of fear, and this part I also agree with, that this is the style that evolved out of the terrible art style that evolved out of fear and resulted in them looking indistinguishable from Filmation, who at least created Fat Albert, which was really good, He-Man, which was weird so much that you had to watch it, and She-Ra, which was mostly the same, and Brave Star, which is also actually good. And while Hanna-Barbera's 80s output was nothing but garbage, with the exception of a pup named Scooby-Doo that was okay. Producers despite the supposed cartoony style. Oh look, a line of action. That must have caught under the radar. Hanna-Barbera basically went down. No, ever. Not even with big budgets. He should have just ended it on this front. He should have just ended it right here, because the next part is something I definitely don't agree with. Fear of drawing an expression or pose. What is that? That is an expression and a pose. And then there's this. You like non-generic characters. Yeah, I agree about that one, but the two frogs shown are pretty appealing, if generic. Yeah. The last really unique looking character was Carl Fredricksen, and yes, I'm only talking about mainstream kids animation because there are a bunch of other studios that are more independent and have a bunch of pretty cool looking characters. Hey, morning cartoon practice. Now let's go down. And get more focus. Shunk. Shunk. what I don't understand is why. Why were executives fearful of doing these quote-unquote radical things that every single one of them being done all the time when they were kids? What did they think was going to happen? Agreed. What did they fear were the consequences of allowing artists to let loose? Can you provide any insight into that? Surely you must have spoken at least once to someone who had some insight, and don't mention hippies, please. That's just a shallow, silly generalization. Yeah, John K. thinks it all started with Scooby-Doo, which was a show about hippies. Even Joe Barbera, as he mentioned before, seemed to have a cynical attitude about what his studio was churning out. But what was he so afraid of? Was it his network executives told them the violence of old Tom and Jerry would never be acceptable today? Fair enough, but what were they afraid of? Arg! But I'm sorry, you're being way too broad by implying that Princess and the Frog is in a galaxy anywhere near the empty, hollow, joyless void that Fonz and its inbred cousins existed. Sure, stuff gets watered down, genericized, but there are degrees of generic stakes. Yeah, this is JLG, our story's protagonist. Well, as for distinctive voices, Jeanette Waldo had a birthday yesterday which she outblocked about, certainly in one as far back as 18. Right, that's a good sob story. Honestly, touch. Honestly, why does everything have to be wacky or cartoony to be respected? I don't think there's anything wrong with going for a style that's more heavily based in realism if it can be properly pulled off. Heavily rotoscope figures like the ones in Beauty didn't work well, but less still human figures like those in 101 Dalmatians made immediately afterwards fare far better in Disney films. Something like biblical stories would require nothing less than a semi-realistic treatment. Lest the client paying for the cartoons reject them or various religious groups stage protests and boycotts. You're playing with material appeal based on the purposes their entire existence is on. If you will start physical wars over religion, there'll certainly start figurative wars over religious cartoons to sort with any sort of irreverent treatment of the source material. As far as quote-unquote fear dictating the blandness of Hanna-Barbera cartoons, that may be indeed true, but at the time of broadcasting, there was nothing that could have been done otherwise. Parent groups placed heavy pressure upon network programmers, who in turn placed heavy pressure upon cartoon producers to either make safe, antiseptic cartoons or be out of a job. The fear, as it were, it comes from the top on down. Now, I know ideally, we'd all like to be able to express ourselves physically as freely as possible, but let's look at reality. Industry is first and foremost a business. The primary goal is to make money. Art quality is of lesser importance, and in some cases, irrelevant. See also the longest running primetime sitcom ever, The Simpsons. If there's one thing I've learned about corporate America since entering it, it's that these people consider money and business relationships to rule, and artists are considered unimportant assembly workers. I was told as much by an employer. Things changed for the better, primarily due to John's work in the late 1980s in the early 1990s, but before then there was really little place but to play by the strict standards and practices rules. You can see what the networks did to even the older WB cartoons, chopped up into little bits by censorship who removed even cartoon bonks on the head. And despite whatever problems there are with the animation parts of The Princess and the Frog, I disagree wholeheartedly with the assessment that it looks like a Saturday morning cartoon, especially it has scenes from actual Saturday morning cartoons on hand here and in other places to compare it to. What's the difference? The airbrushing? The drawings are almost identical. What's the difference? The airbrushing? The drawings are almost identical. But I'm sorry, you're being way too broad by him. And here comes Guy. I can't think of a better description of modern Disney than empty, hollow, and joyless. Well, I could add a dozen more adjectives, and I must agree that they look pretty much the same to me. Even though people would say I'm parroting John K, I am John K, but whatever. I would have said earlier, but was somewhat ambivalent. I actually find modern Disney to be more offensive than these things. Sometimes much more offensive. I've never seen a 70s, 80s cartoon that looked half as awful as Pocahontas. It's kind of bizarre. Well, we should certainly get a much higher standard of quality from them. Any good point, no matter how good it is, can be tarnished with hyperbole. Happens all the time. It's one thing to express dislike for the 90s Disney features, even considering them joyless and empty. It's quite another to consider the character design together with the likes of the Gary Coleman Show and the Fonz. Hey, sorry, but to put it bluntly, that's just silly.